Anyway, he said, Ian, what was your question again? I said, where do you think these guys went? And he deliberately picked up a glass, took another long draught, and he said, what makes you think they went anywhere? How about the possibility that they're actually still here? That they are simply outside of our spectrum, our visual, oral, our five senses. And I said, well, develop. And he said, well, you know, what we do know about this culture, because what they left us, was that they were extremely well educated. They were extremely knowledgeable, had a phenomenal culture, perhaps in many respects more advanced than anything that is on the planet today. He said they were also unadulterated. As far as we know, they didn't have any contact with any of the other cultures in Central or South America. So he said, consider the possibility that whoever was their mentor, whoever it was, whether it was an individual or another civilization, but consider the possibility that they evolved. They simply evolved. And he said, oh, there's no other word for it, but spiritually. He said, although the word doesn't really describe what I'm trying to say. But they simply evolved to the next level of the game, en masse. And I said, well, this is great. And we got into a wonderful discussion. You know, went way into the night and the next morning. Anyway, I said to him, I said, Professor, that's really fantastic. I said, so when do you write a paper on this subject? And he took another long drawer of drink and he said, you know what, I'd really still like to be drawing my pension this time next year. Which of course opened up a whole other debate about how, you know, orthodox views are maintained by the peer review process. And you know, he gave me a phrase that I've used many times since. He said, what you need to remember, and he said, nobody ever gets awarded a PhD by arguing with the establishment. Well, that experience and that conversation obviously stayed with me. And then over the last sort of few years, I've started to also become aware of a rise, if you like, in an awakening process. Whether it's spiritual, whether it's political, but I mean, even the fact that we've got, I don't know, what, 50 odd people here tonight. You know, when I first started giving talks on these kind of subjects, if I got into double figures, that was amazing. But now, you know, it's 50, 60, I mean, I was in Stockholm, you know, a couple of weeks ago, and we had 85 odd people in Stockholm, and you know, people coming to listen to these kind of presentations, not even in their first language. So this awakening is moving at a dramatic rate. And let me tell you, Zbigniew Brzezinski knows this. Because he wrote a book in 1969, published in 1970, called Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era. And in that book, and I encourage you, if you can find the book, read it, because it's, to some extent, the blueprint for everything that's occurring. But in that book, he makes the observation, he said, one of the challenges for Western governments will be to keep their people locked into consumerist materialism, preventing them from realizing who they truly are. Now, just 6 months ago, on May the 15th of this year, he gave a presentation to the Council on Foreign Relations where he said something similar. He changed one word, basically. He said the stumbling block to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. So here you've got a guy, 40 years apart, saying, basically, there's a spiritual awakening, and we've got to prevent it occurring by keeping people locked into consumerist materialism. And now there's a political awakening. Combine the two, it's got a problem perhaps. Well, I was probably about 2 years ago now, I was looking to come up with a phrase that described what was occurring, and I came up with the phrase homo luminous, you know, the next stage of the game. And I'm just mucking around at the time, you know, sort of kicking around some ideas, because clearly we were, you know, there's a number of people, an increasing number of people, starting to step beyond this political and spiritual construct that's been created by those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of the planet. But one of the things I've learned in my research is I don't have an original idea in my head, because, you know, once I think I've come up with an original idea, all I've got to do is Google it and I can find somebody else who's been there way before me. And this was no different, because I Googled the phrase homo luminous and I found that a guy called Alberto Villoldo had been using it for some time. Now, Alberto Villoldo is an anthropologist, and he's been working with these guys, the Quero, for about 35 years. Now, this is a particular small group of the Quero called the Laika. And the Laika disappeared off the face of the earth 500 years ago. because they were chased into the mountains by the conquistadors. And everybody assumed that they'd been murdered by the conquistadors because the conquistadors returned, but these guys didn't. Well, this disappearance was a little bit different from the Mayan disappearance because these guys were seeking refuge at 16,500 feet in the high Andes. And they stayed there for 25 generations. And then they made their way back down into what they call the lower world in the early 1960s. And the reason that they came back was because they believed that the time was now that they had to share their knowledge, their insights, their prophecy. Well, so in the ensuing period, I mean, I read a bunch of books that have been written by Alberto Volodo and a few other people that have been to visit with these people. But I thought, I really want to go and see these guys for myself. I've got a few questions I really want to ask them based on what I've read. So anyway, I discovered that Alberto Volodo was running this tour. It was a 3-week trip, basically. 2 weeks up in the mountains, 1 week in the jungle. And I discovered this about a year ago. Anyway, I made contact with the Four Winds office, which is Alberto's business front, and made inquiries about whether I could go. And I was told, well, you're not attending any of our courses, you're not doing any of our workshops. And I said, no, but I'd still like to go. So anyway, cut a long story short, I paid the money. It wasn't cheap. I paid the money, and I got on the trip. Now I thought, I don't know how this is going to pan out. I have no idea how I'm going to work out how to spend the time with these guys. These guys aren't going to speak English. I don't speak Spanish or Quero, but I'll just go. Anyway, so it's quite a large group. There's probably about 40 people or so in the group. But I needn't worry because it seems that the script had already been written. The problem was that on the first night there, I broke my ankle. I fell down the stairs in Cusco. We'd flown straight into Cusco. Cusco's at about 9,500 feet. And even though I sort of thought I'd taken all the precautions for being at altitude, nonetheless, about 10 o'clock at night, the nausea hit me and I went straight down the stairs. Well, I couldn't be bothered to go to the hospital that time of night, and I felt like crap with the nausea. So I just got the hotel to give me a bunch of ice, packed my ankle in ice, and went to the hospital the next morning, where they x-rayed it, and then I had to pay for the plaster in the pharmacy, and then I had to pay the doctor to patch it up, and then I had to settle the bill before they do anything, and it was outrageous. The bill was $30. If I'd have been in the US, it would have been $30,000. But anyway, so here I was now, ankle in plaster. The following morning, which was the Monday, and we were due to go up to Pisac. We're moving our base to Pisac, where we were going to meet up with a group of Quero that were going to be spending some time with us. And so the next morning I managed to establish there was a shop in town where I could get some crutches, but I got into a taxi and the taxi driver said, why do you need to go to this shop? I said, I need some crutches. He said, oh, my sister has some crutches and she's not using anymore. So I put some money back into the Peruvian economy by buying his sister's crutches. So now I was mobile. But on the next day, the first day of the full day, we were in Pisac, and the schedule was to go for a hike to some sacred place into the Andes. Well, I wasn't going to really get very far, was I? So I said, look, I'm just going to get on the bus. I've got food and water. I'm just going to sort of find a nice quiet spot and hang out. Anyway, I managed to walk about 800 yards, found a nice spot, sat down, beautiful day, I mean, wonderful vista. I just sat down there thinking, well, that's fucked that trip, isn't it, really? £5,000 down the tubes. But I needn't have worried. An hour later, this guy comes along and sits down. Now, I've got a bit of a problem because I don't speak any Quero, Spanish, and he doesn't speak any English. But then about another half an hour later, another one of his colleagues comes along and sits down, and the two of them are jabbering away. And then about 20 minutes later, a third member of the Quero came along, but this time it was a girl. I should call her Thelma, because I can't pronounce her local name. And it sounded like Thelma. Anyway, she came along, but she spoke English. Not just spoke English, spoke good English. And she was the youngest of this group. She was 38. These guys, and this guy I think was actually in his late 40s. The other guy was in his 70s. Anyway, so we got chatting, and they asked me, obviously what I'd done. There's an amazing talking point, the plaster cast. What I'd done, and so I explained what had occurred. And they said, well, why are you here? And I said, well, funny you should say that, because I actually wanted to sit down with you guys and ask you a few questions. So we got into some discussion, and I said, look, why did you come out of the mountains when you did? Why didn't you stay up there? enjoy your life at 16,500 feet without all of this bullshit down here? And they said, because we have to share the prophecy. And I said, the prophecy is? And they said, 90% of the people have to leave the planet. And I thought, okay, this is Georgia Guidestone stuff. But these guys didn't put the Georgia Guidestones up. So I said, why do 90% of the people have to leave the planet? And they said, because you are raping the planet. You are taking more than you need. And these guys live a very, very simple lifestyle. And everything about their lifestyle is based on an intimate relationship with their environment. They only take what they need. And if they find themselves in a situation where they have more than what they need, then they basically go into ceremony to give it back.